Welcome to another pre-show, everyone.
Oh, in they come filing in. Oh, and look, isn't that wonderful? For whatever reason, I don't know what's possessed them. They're doing a Scottish theme. The men are all in kilts. The ladies have those long dresses with the tartan sashes. It's. I don't know why you're doing this, ladies and gentlemen, but thank you. It's impressive.
That's nice, I guess. Scottish is okay.
Well, Scottish is okay. Can you know how much those get-ups cost? And to think that they were willing to put out that kind of money just to come to the pre-show today. I'm grateful, even if you're not.
Okay, I can be grateful too.
All right. That's very comforting, I guess.
All right, first question is from Philip, who asks, what is the theme song music for the podcast, and what is its significance?
That's a great question. And the answer is, I have no idea.
Yeah, this is a frequent question, and the person
I've never been asked it before.
Oh, well, I usually get it in emails or in comments.
Because you never told me.
Yeah, a lot of people.
I gotta tell you, honestly, it sounds to me like the elevator music in the Temple House Tower elevator. I hear the same tune every time I get on that thing. I just thought it was your elevator music.
Wow. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, it does play that music, but this was picked out by a mutual friend who also put together the intro graphic. Yeah, our friend Eric. And he this is from freemusicarchive.org. It's old-timey public domain music. The band is called Jockers Dance Orchestra, and the song is called The Royal Vagabond. How do you like that?
I love that. And it kind of fits.
It does fit to a T.
Yeah, The Royal Vagabond. Okay. I had no idea. I just thought it was the Temple House Tower elevator music.
Yeah.
Except that's all I've ever heard of the elevator, except for the week between Christmas and New Year's.
Right. Yeah. And what do you hear between Christmas and New Year's?
So Christmas carols. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know who programs your elevator music then, but it's always the good stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, Good King Wenceslaus and the First Noel and things like that. It's never chestnuts roasting on an open fire or stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's always good religious. I mean, mind you, it takes long enough for the elevator to get anywhere up. So you've got a while to listen. And I think actually when I've had to go to those command meetings up on the penthouse, it takes, I guesstimate, about 6 minutes maybe to get up there. And so there's usually time for 2.5 songs on the way up. And normally it's just the Royal Vagabond and Endless Loop. But at Christmas time, you can usually get in as many as 2.5 carols by the time you get all the way up there.
Okay. Next question is from Byron.
Okay.
I recently heard about a paramasonic Catholic fraternity called the Order of the Pug. Please tell us about it. Also, was it a serious organization, and does it continue to exist?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it was a German thing. It was founded by one of the German Catholic princelings about 1741 or 2 or something like that. And it was after the first condemnation of Freemasonry came out. It was the idea that they'd have something similar that didn't fall into the ban. And so they basically set it up in such a way that none of the condemnations of Pope Clement XIII would apply to it. But it didn't last long. I think it was pretty much over by 1748. And I don't believe it's around today. There might, see, the thing with these things, though, is that there might be any number of people claiming, we're the Order of the Pug. Because, it's like the Templars or anybody like that. You can call yourself anything you want. Rosicrucian. It's not like there's a central body that monitors landmark or not landmark brand name usurpation.
Yeah.
So, and anyone can do this. I can say that all I have to do is find the name of an extinct organization and claim that somehow it survived all these years, and my group is the legitimate heirs. Well, how do you prove that?
You don't need to.
No, you don't. All you need to do is put up some impressive costumes and regalia and fun medals and stuff. Interesting ceremonies, which you can, cobble together. And you can call yourself anything you want. Those are the Sacred Order of the Mistletoe.
Sounds good to me. Next 2 questions are from William. How is the church in Anglo-Saxon England different from the post-Norman Conquest church? What aspects of the Anglo-Saxon church are forever lost to history?
Well, the aspects that are forever lost to history I wouldn't know about because they're forever lost to history. I don't know I don't know what to tell you. If nobody knows them, I sure don't. Okay? Let's get that straight. I know. But where one of the big differences, of course, was that Anglo-Saxon England was not as centralized as Norman England. The same was true in a sense of the church. During the period when there were 7 kingdoms in England, the 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, the Heptarchy, there were as many national hierarchies. And even when they were united under Alfred the Great, the church was much more decentralized within England than it became. Of course, there were a lot more Anglo-Saxon royal saints than there were under the Normans and subsequent rulers. I suppose part of this is because younger brothers and sisters tended to go off to monasteries rather than, intrigue against their fathers and older brothers the way the Normans and Plantagenets and Lancasters and York did. In fact, the only post-Norman conquest king was up for canonization, to my knowledge. Well, there are a couple who are servants of God, and they are Henry VI and James II.
Okay.
Charles I, of course, is considered a saint by High Church Anglicans, and some members of the Anglican Ordinariate pray that he'll be canonized by the Catholic Church. But the Stuarts are they don't really count because they were Scots. Yeah. So basically, the only English king who's a candidate for canonization that I know of is Henry VI.
All right.
Whereas with the Anglo-Saxons, you had, of course, St. Edward the Confessor, who was the last of them. But you also had a bunch of princes and so forth. And there were several kings like Edwin and the first Edward, the martyr, several Anglo-Saxon kings who were saints. Alfred the Great is considered a blessed in some places. And then there were a whole lot of princes and princesses who went into monasteries and are from the Anglo-Saxon royal families and are considered saints.
All right, William's second question. The Eastern Orthodox view on contraception is quite compromised. The general idea being non-abortifacient contraception is permissible within marriage as long as it is not done for selfish reasons. I recently heard in a talk that one of the reasons contraception is intrinsically evil is because marital union is designed to reflect the life-giving aspects of the Trinity, and contraception frustrates this reality. The thought struck me that perhaps because the Orthodox reject the filioque and don't have the same Latin Trinitarian understanding of marital procreation, This is one of the reasons they have succumbed to the secular worldview on this. That and the lack of magisterial infallibility. Do you think this is a contributing factor? Am I misunderstanding the Orthodox view of the Trinity? And do you think acceptance of contraception would be an obstacle to reunion?
Well, okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Firstly, I'm really not competent to talk about the ins and outs of the Orthodox view of the Trinity, save that they deny the filioque. This certainly does have all sorts of repercussions, and it may well be that your reading of it is correct, but I'm not really in a position to say so. I remember a friend of mine was Russian Orthodox. I mentioned to him that I've been to a Russian Catholic liturgy. And he said, oh, well, I suppose it's very different from ours. And I said, no, it's identical. And he said, well, they say the filioque. And I said, no, they don't. They have to believe it, but they don't have to say it because it's not in the original form of the creed. So he says, well, if it's not that important, would you be willing to give it up? It so happened that I had just glanced at the proceedings of a Catholic and Orthodox symposium on the Trinity and on the filioque. And these various Catholic and Orthodox theologians were going on and on and on about the various repercussions of the acceptance or the denial of the filioque. And I've got to tell you, it was so intricate, I couldn't follow it. I simply couldn't. And so I said, let me send you something. I sent this to him, and his response was one sentence: ow, my head hurts.
Yeah.
And so I said to him, I can't very well be happy to toss it away, because I really couldn't tell you what I'd be tossing in terms of the repercussions, and neither could you. So that was how we left that. But I mentioned it because obviously there are deeper repercussions, but I'm not really capable of commenting on them. However, I can say that the lack of an infallible authority has certainly given them some problems in this area, and the proof of the pudding, as I related in our last broadcast, is the shifting stance on contraception you'll see in the different editions of the Introduction to Orthodoxy by Bishop Callistos Ware. He starts out in the 50s absolutely against artificial contraception of any kind, just like the Catholics, and now it's permissible. So there's a shifting target. It's kind of like the Anglicans, who at their Lambeth Conference in 1920 absolutely denied it, and then 10 years later reversed themselves, which, however, gave birth to a pamphlet by the Anglican Bishop Charles Gore, which is really excellent reading as to why no Christian of any sort should sign off on artificial contraception.
Okay. You think the Orthodox acceptance of contraception it would be an obstacle to reunion?
No, there's so many other problems. If the major problems were ironed out, that would follow very easily.
Yeah, I think so too. Because I remember you said, the big obstacle is our liturgy. And
Well,
I thought you said that. I thought like
a change in liturgy is. Remember, a lot of Orthodox theologians, and I have to say, one thing you can never say is the Orthodox believe or say or do this or that. You can say a lot of them do, but you'll always find exceptions to every rule. But a lot of Orthodox seized on the change in our liturgy as yet another example of Latin indifference toward tradition.
Yeah.
That is why, incidentally, when Benedict XVI came out with the motu proprio, both the patriarchs of Constantinople and Moscow, in union at that point, praised it. And that's something that, remember that Catholic liberals will mention the Orthodox when it's convenient, but not when it isn't. So their approbation of Benedict XVI in those areas never got a lot of play. But this is why, ironically, our relationship with them was much better under Benedict than it had been under John Paul II, who, despite being very fond of the certainly the Eastern Catholics, the Eastern Church in general, nevertheless was a Pole. And the Poles and Russians have certain, shall we say, deep issues. And it's much better than it's been with Francis, who's seen as the epitome of everything that all the innovation that they accuse Latins of doing. Whereas Benedict was, as far as they could see, a man of tradition, and thus after their own heart to some degree. The most ecumenical thing that the Latin Rite Catholics can do toward the Orthodox is to regain our own traditions. If we don't want to do that, we're not ecumenical.
Let's take this into a tangent that I've been interested in this week, which is Poland. Poland seems to be doing pretty well. What do you think about Poland right now?
Poland has problems. A lot of the young people don't go to Mass anymore.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same road in a sense that Ireland was going. But the difference is that there's resistance in Poland to it in a way that wasn't in Ireland. And the other thing is that Poland has a great geographical difference. The fellow who was reelected, President Duda, who's a very good fellow. It's unfortunate his name makes me want to sing. But I won't tell you which song, but it's Camptown Races. And anyway, no, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, don't do it. We know it.
You don't have to look so pained. I'm not going to sing Camptown Races. It's tempting, but I'm not doing it. I'm a grown-up. I don't just succumb to any odd desire I've got, especially to sing a song like Camptown Races. Now, Stewball, on the other hand, I might want to sing Stewball, but we'll set that aside for the moment. The thing is that Duda was elected by a narrow margin, and interestingly enough, as you know, Poland is the patching back together of three areas that had been partly under Russia, partly under Germany, partly under Austria. And the westernmost German part of Poland voted against Duda. It was the Russian and Austrian parts that voted for him. And that, again, shows up, a dichotomy that's present in countries that are partly Habsburg and partly not.
I don't know. I guess I just really like the memes that are emanating out of Poland. And
listen, Poland and Hungary, to a great degree, is the same way. They're far from perfect paradises or totally safe havens. What makes them different is that there's resistance in a way that we don't have.
But I mean, aren't they more Catholic in a sense? Because, like, my all-time favorite picture, which is of the priest shooting the gun, the heavy-set priest with the glasses, the cool guy with sunglasses and shooting the gun. Well, that's opening to a gun range. That's like a Catholic ceremony.
Well, yeah, they have a lot of that, but you would find that in Austria too, and Austria is much less Catholic than Poland. The Catholicism is so much a part of the culture here that you'll see wayside shrines everywhere, and that's true in Catholic Germany. It's true in Poland. It's true in the Catholic Netherlands. It's true in the Southern Netherlands are Catholic. The cultural Catholicism is still strong all over Europe.
Okay.
All over Catholic.
So you're trying to say it's the world's tallest pygmy right now.
At the moment, yeah. It's the world's tallest pygmy, but it's a tall pygmy with a spear.
Okay.
And the same with Hungary. And to a degree, Czechia, of all places, and Slovakia, Romania, they're beginning to go the same route, which is good.
Did you see that Dominic Tarzinski video that I sent you, where it's a member of parliament of Poland who's apparently Catholic, but he's also very strict on immigration, and his big thing is what he keeps talking about is, how many Poles do you know who have blown themselves up? 0. And
Well, there's
it
that.
was so funny. It was such a funny video. You have all these liberal interviewers asking loaded questions like, "Don't you think you have a moral duty to take these refugees in?" And then he says, "No." No, I don't.
Well, see, that's the thing. You will find people in Central Europe who are willing to say those things in a way that you won't in America or in Western Europe.
See, that's why I kind of am wondering about what's going on, because it's so different from America, and it's so refreshing to see politicians be, at least appear, stronger on some of these issues.
Well, this is simply because you got to remember they lived under communism, and the problem, of course, is that the younger generation that doesn't remember what communism was like, a lot of them are very much attracted to the West, which symbolizes progress and enlightenment and so on and so forth. But a lot of the older people and some of the younger people are only too aware of where that leads.
Mm.
So, as I say, there's a resistance here, which you don't find in the West, but which I think you will for different reasons. I think that, in our own country, you're already beginning to see it, and it won't be a pretty resistance, and it won't. Our problem, of course, is that because we're not really a Catholic country, it's going to be very unfocused as far as its ideology. It'll be waving the flag and lifting up the cross without a corpus, but what will that mean? Don't know. I had a discussion with a friend of mine who's he's Persian Armenian, and lived under the Soviets and so forth. And so he was saying that as far as he's concerned, it looks like America is headed toward 1917 in Russia. And I said, yeah, I think there's a great possibility of that. But I think in this particular case, the whites, I don't mean racially, but whites versus reds. I say in this case, I think the whites will win, but I have no idea what that's going to look like. Because the equivalent of the white guards, the white movement in Russia, are our militias or, the resistance that's gathering. And these are not people with a coherent or unified body of belief. You see, it's just that they know what they don't like, and there are a lot more of them, really, than there are the revolutionaries. I know that a lot of particular people look at the United States and figure that there'll be a replay of 1917, all right, down to the Reds winning. I don't see that, because our homegrown insurrectionists are not. They're not the Russian Reds. They're not nearly as smart. The country isn't nearly as centralized, and it's a great paradox. But Russia's a much bigger country than we are. But in 1917, everything was centralized in the corridor between St. Petersburg and Moscow. The industry, the armaments, all that. And the rest of the country, huge as it was just sort of there. And it took them about 3 or 4 years to conquer it. But because they had most of the weapons and they had most of the communications and so forth at their command, they were able to do it. And they inherited a pretty robust, shall we say, internal security apparatus that the Tsars left behind. With us, our internal security is falling apart. The military, what counts in something like this are the combat arms. And most of the combat arms are highly unlikely to fire on their fellow citizens, on their fellow deplorables. And most of the weaponry and so on is not in the centers of, shall we say, red influence. It's outside. It's not in New York. It's not in Boston. It's not in Los Angeles or San Francisco. And I'm sorry, But you give me a bunch of armed rednecks, and you give me a bunch of armed Antifa. Guess who's going to win?
I've always had the impression that our armed forces are more often than not conservative.
Well, that's not really true the way you think. The leadership has certainly caved a long time ago. Hence, women, gays,
Sure.
everything else. The removal of the Confederate flags from the Marines. People don't realize, because they've never served themselves, how important that flag is to a lot of serving Southern boys who go into the combat arms, because their great grandfathers and great great grandfathers fought for the South, and they very often are inspired by their example. They don't realize what taking those things away means to them. So you have a huge gulf between the leadership in the Army, between the, for want of a better word, the service support element and the combat arms. And my suspicion is that if we did have, which God forbid, a civil war, the armed forces would fragment. But the portions that would be the most effective, shall we say, would go with the anti-Reds.
Okay. Right.
I mean, it wouldn't. I mean, God forbid, because it would be such a mess. People talk about it, are beginning to speak about it very blithely right now. They don't understand just how disruptive such a conflict would be. And I'll be honest. I mean, you know what an accelerationist is, yeah?
Yeah.
There are a lot of accelerationists around. I mean, maybe not thousands, but there are quite a few who feel, well, so what? The situation is rotten. We're murdering thousands of infants a day. We're ruled by scum. Bring it all down. Finita la commedia. And from a purely theoretical point of view, that sounds very attractive. But they fail to realize just how horrific the results of that would be. And it could be, by the way, that just like having a tooth yanked, sometimes you have to go through that.
Yeah.
Then it may be part of the divine plan, for all I know. And my desire to maintain our structures as long as we can, I might be wrong. But I know how unpleasant things can get. And I'm not 20, I'm 60.
All right. Next question is from Aaron. Dear Mr. Coulombe, and an insolent nod in the direction of the parsimonious publisher with his bigotry towards international postage.
Hey, they got your number, all right. That's great. I'm glad you found someone among our patrons who understands you. That's beautiful. You know how many people long for someone to really accept and understand them just as they are? That's beautiful. I'm touched.
You have previously spoken about the 20th July plot to kill Adolf Hitler and its likely outcome. So I'd like to know what you think would have been the likely outcome of SOE's planned assassination attempt on Hitler at the Berghof, known as Operation Foxley, had it been carried out, especially since the proposed date for Foxley was just under a week before July 20th, 1944.
Well, I mean, if it had succeeded, it would have had a better chance. If they'd killed Hitler then, they probably would have had a better chance in capturing the machinery. But they would have been faced with the same problem that Stauffenberg's crew would have faced, which is now what? Their hope was that they could that a post-Hitler government could convince the Allies to make the Western Allies to make a separate peace and help them stop the Soviets from overwhelming Europe. That was the hope. How would that have played out in real life? I don't know. I'm sure Churchill and de Gaulle would have been very much in favor of that. But of course, they didn't have the whip hand. It was Roosevelt who did. And he was very committed to his alliance with Uncle Joe, as he called him. Stalin.
Okay. Next question is from Marianne. Dear Charles, what is your opinion on the Nag Hammadi Scriptures? In my humble opinion, they read like bad fan fiction.
Well, that's a fair question. The Nag Hammadi manuscripts are a library of manuscripts like the Dead Sea Scrolls, who were discovered in Egypt. And they were a whole library of heretofore unknown Gnostic writings, many of which claim to be Gospels and that kind of thing. Now, mind you, we already knew of a number of this kind of literature, which is called pseudepigrapha. There's a word for you. Pseudepigrapha. Things like the Book of Adam and Eve, the Gospel of the Egyptians, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of James, and so forth. I mean, I feel about them the way I feel about everything else that didn't make it into the canon of Scripture. There's a reason why the church didn't put it in the canon of Scripture, which was they infallibly defined that these were not inspired by God. Now, does that mean they're utterly worthless? No, they're not. They can be useful witnesses to history. The Proto-Evangelium of James, for instance, gives us a number of details about the early life of Jesus that are lacking in the four Gospels. Are they infallible like the Gospels? Definitely not. But the church has accepted them as a valuable historical witness for as long back as we know. I can tell you that the Gospel of Philip, which was at Nag Hammadi, is interesting because one of the things that you'll often hear church historians say is that the number of sacraments being fixed at 7 was a late development. Well, that's what they say. But the Gospel of Philip, so-called, is, I think, 3rd century, and it speaks of 7 sacraments. So even though it's a Gnostic document, and I think there are some heretical elements in it, nevertheless, it's an historical witness to what Christians already believed back then. So, there you go.
Question from Thomas. A few weeks back, Charles expounded on the evil eye and the like of malevolent folks in the community. Is there any precedent in pious folklore for a benevolent eye? Obviously, we pray for Our Lady to turn thine eyes of mercy toward us when we pray the Hail, Holy Queen. But is there any legend of folks receiving graces by simply being gazed upon by a holy person here on earth?
You know, I have a vague memory of something along those lines, actually. Some saint looking at someone, probably on their way to getting martyred, and it touching their hearts or something, but I don't remember, frankly.
Okay.
But anyway, I wouldn't be surprised. It sounds like the sort of thing that folklore does.
All right, last question is from Patrick. May Charles please discuss the priestly society of St. Josaphat and the wider struggle inside the Ukrainian rite in regard to de-latinisations, which the society opposes. What is the movement to de-latinize motivated by? Also, may he also speak more generally about any modernist influence that got into the Eastern rites after the council?
He might.
Yeah, he might.
Okay, well, that's good. No. All right. Well,
Poor Patrick.
yeah, all right. The Society of St. Josaphat is an organization of Ukrainian Catholic priests who are against the de-Latinization. Now, we have to step back a frame. What does all this mean? Well, the Ukrainian Catholic Church, like the Ukrainian Byzantine Catholic Church, like the Belarusian Catholic Church, came into union with the Holy See at the Union of Brest in 1586. And at that time, it was sworn that they would not be Latinized. Now, as time went on, however, because they had a lot of interaction with Latin Catholics, you got to bear in mind that prior to the schism and even after, there was a lot of liturgical interplay between the different rites of the church. in ways that you might not expect. So, for instance, and this makes it funny in light of their later denials of the two doctrines, our feasts of the Immaculate Conception and of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, we actually picked up from the Byzantines. And similarly, the Byzantine and Orthodox practice of the sort of icon of the crucified Christ on Good Friday and its veneration, they actually took from our kissing, our creeping to the cross on Good Friday. So there was a lot of liturgical interplay and devotional interplay. That's why, for instance, there are certain saints and certain shrines that we have in common, like Czestochowa in Poland, for instance. The Virgin of Czestochowa, both Catholics and Orthodox go to, the shrine of St. Nicholas at Bari. So in those days, there was a great deal of devotional and liturgical interplay. Now, after the reunion of Brest, a lot of the Ukrainian and Belarusian and Ruthenian Catholics, or Eastern Catholics, both clergy and people, would occasionally see things that their Latin brethren did and be interested in them and seek to take them on. So, for instance, benediction of the Blessed Sacrament, totally alien to the Orthodox tradition, or the Byzantine tradition, but a number of people started doing it. The Feast of Corpus Christi, devotion of the Sacred Heart, things like that, they started to pick up on. Now, at the same time, in certain places, various Latin priests attempted to forcibly Latinize the liturgy and the customs and devotions of the whatever Eastern rites they were working among. Successive popes condemned any sort of forced Latinization. But I think that we have to distinguish between forced Latinization from the outside and customs and practices that the people and or priests of those rites naturally felt an attraction to. I do think we have to distinguish between those because the one is organic, the other is not. And the thing with liturgy is that organic development usually is a fairly positive thing. Sudden forced stuff generally doesn't work very well. The reason is that usually the one is brought about gradually through the sensus fidei, the sense of the faithful, and the other is simply mandated by somebody who thinks he knows better than everybody before him. And in the church, as in the state, as in everywhere else, that usually isn't true. Sometimes it is. Usually it's not. And there are very often unpleasant consequences. So, after Vatican II, this question came to the fore, and also the question of the ecumenical relationship with the Orthodox, who, of course, are always looking for reasons to be annoyed, not just at us, but each other. And I don't say that to be mean. My Orthodox friends out there, and you know I love you, and you know there are a lot of you. But it's true. If you don't believe me, Moscow versus Constantinople, old calendar versus new calendar, deal. So, what happened then is that it became a very big thing among certain Byzantine Catholic clergy, especially at the top, to de-Latinize, which meant to remove from the Byzantine liturgy everything that was not Orthodox. Now, in some places, for instance, people had taken up kneeling at the consecration. Other places, they'd sort of minimize the iconostasis. There were different things. And in some cases, the de-Latinization was very draconian. And that was the resistance to that, actually, was the organization of the Society of St. Josaphat, which saw itself as being roughly analogous to the Society of St. Pius X. And in fact, they were allied for some time. They may be now, I don't know. Now, I mention this because it goes back to a problem that we've had consistently since Vatican II and before in the Catholic Church, in the Latin Catholic Church, and apparently they have in the Eastern Catholic Church, which is a complete and total disregard of the customs of the people, of the sensus fidei, of their feelings. You know, if you're suddenly going to tell people that everything they've done before is wrong, you better have a damn good reason. And if questioned, your answer had better not be, because I tell you so. I am Lord, you are slave. Yeah, okay, don't ask for my money in your collection plate, smart guy. And that's the problem, you see. In a lot of cases, not all, in a lot of cases, the de-latinization was done in an extremely unpastoral manner without any regard to the fact that a lot of it had grown up very naturally and very organically. And I think part of the problem with the way authority is exercised in the Catholic Church is that it's done in a much more, it's been done since the council in a much, much more autocratic way than it was done before. And this, by the way, is paradoxical, because you'll always hear the priests and bishops talking about how, oh, it's much more democratic since the council. Before then, popes and bishops did whatever they want. Now, well, that's not really true. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. And, I do hate to get all Jungian on you, but old Uncle Carl did have a very correct understanding of the fact that human beings, the more we talk in one way, the more we're usually the opposite. So you show me somebody who's always talking about freedom and openness, and I'll show you somebody who can't wait to get his foot on your neck. You show me someone who's always talking about order and discipline, and I'll show you somebody who's really an anarchist.
Ooh.
It's true. I mean, because that guy, you can deal with. He sets rules, but he sets them very often because he knows there's a reason for rules, being kind of wild at heart himself. So you can usually negotiate with a guy like that. Someone who's all about freedom and openness.
We've got a lot of those people.
You bet.
Too many.
You betcha.
Okay, that will do it for the pre-show.
All right. Well, once again, on behalf of the people of Scotland, I would like to thank you all for your lovely attire this evening. If I'd known, we would have had sort of a mini Burns night supper or something. But thank you anyway. It's very attractive.
Yes. Stay tuned for the full episode. Coming right at you.
You bet.